these 5 toy lines are my top picks for some of the scariest things out there. Hello toy fans, I'm here with another one of my top 5s, and today for our October Day, I'm actually looking at top 5 scary toy lines, or toy lines that were meant to be kind of scary. Now, these are based on ones that I have in my personal collection, because I'm actually pulling from my personal collection for the samples. So there are things like the Real Ghostbusters, obviously scary line. I don't have any of the Real Ghostbusters stuff, so I can't put that line in there. And then there was also some stipulations of like, if I didn't have it, I couldn't put it in, and if it was something that I've already kind of reviewed, I'm probably not going to put it in. So like the WWE monsters, I don't really want to put that in. I've already talked about those. But I was looking at some toy lines from a while back. So some from when I was a kid, and then some that I started doing as collecting in my 20s, because I'm now way past that. And I found some really awesome samples of some things that some of us might not even heard of. So these are going to be my top 5 scary toy lines from my personal collection. So what do you say? Let's get into it. Alright, so my number 5 toy line actually comes from 1995. This was one of Toy Biz's toy lines that they did. They had a Marvel license back in the day, and of course, you know, they were moving up into Blade territory soon after, so they had some really good stuff coming out. And after X-Men, they also did Ghost Rider. That's right, my number 5, of course, is Toy Biz's Ghost Rider line. Alright, the number 5 in the line, and I actually chose this one because this is the only one I have, but this is Vengeance from the 1995 Toy Biz Ghost Rider series from Marvel. And these figures are actually really cool. Not only did they have some pretty decent articulation for 95, you know, you've got all sorts of, moving parts here, the hips that kick out so they can ride their motorcycles, etc. But they also had some spring-powered features as well. Now this one, my spring's broken, but you can imagine that it would pop out and it would grab him with his rib cage. And just even the detail of like the flames and stuff on the top of the head. The paint apps were bright and fun, but still kind of dingy with the grays. And last thing that I loved about this line, and this is one where I would actually like to have some more of these in my collection, is that they had all these really awesome glow-in-the-dark features. So you had the glow-in-the-dark, chain that would go around him as his accessory. And then, he had glow-in-the-dark paint applications on the teeth. And the chains, the bone chains around the wrist as well. And it was such a cool looking line. It had great coloring that really matched, what was going on with the comics in the 90s. But then also had like a really kind of beefed up vibe to it. And it felt like a chunky toy that was really good. And a lot of the series was like this. The vehicles that they had on it were great. And the figure line itself is pretty much very vast with a lot of good play features, lots of glow-in-the-dark pieces and accessories, and really bright yet dingy fun paint apps. I love the coloring in that line and also the glow-in-the-dark pieces. It's what makes that line so cool. And of course, there's some of those I would like to actually add over and have a few more samples in my collection. I picked him because I thought he was really cool. Alright, so we're looking at my number 4 pick for the my top 5 scary toy lines. This one came out in 2001 initially. The particular figure I chose to show came out in 2003. The line consisted really of 4 figures, technically 3 figures and then 1 giant figure. And I absolutely love this game. It's actually from a game, and the toys actually come from a company called BBI. So, interesting little tidbit about them. 2 of the characters are the same character, but in different times. And then you had one of the main bad guys, and then one of the giant bad guys. So, my number 4 toy line is Soul Reaver by BBI. I picked Lieutenant Raziel, which came out in 2003 from the 2001 BBI line of Soul Reaver. If you've never heard of Soul Reaver, that's okay, because it's from a video game, but it was probably one of the coolest video games. It came from a series that was part of the Legacy of Kain, which was created by Crystal Dynamics, and I absolutely, I loved Blood Omen, which was the first Legacy of Kain game, but when Soul Reaver came out, it was almost revolutionary in the storytelling. And it felt like an open world scenario, but only if you could unlock certain things or do certain things. And so it became a nice kind of open world story that you had to play through and discover and learn. And it is a glorious game. So if you ever get to play it, it's definitely worth playing. Now, this figure here, Lieutenant Raziel, is one of the more deluxe figures that came out later on down the line, but in the line you had a giant, which was called Duma. You had, of course, Kain, which was one of the main characters, the main antagonist, and then you had Raziel as a specter or spirit, where his bones were ripped out of his wings and he would just catch flight with it, so he was all wrapped up. This is one of the ones I have that's not all completely beat up. And one of the things that occurs with this toy line, especially with certain pieces, is that lots of pieces fall off, lots of pieces break. A lot of these kind of stick and don't exactly move when this figure gets warm. This one's been kind of kind, but a lot of these joints, including this one, they stick and they don't tend to move very well. And that was just kind of a part of their making. You had pieces like this that would hinder articulation and have other pieces that were glued in. You'd have pieces that would kind of snap into place, but were also quite often easily losable. So it's one of those where it's it's a cool line, and it's a great looking line for shelf, but it's not exactly the best line for playing with. And the only reason why it's considered a scary line is because the game is really about vampires, and some of the game has some scariness about it. All in all, it's cool. It's a great line. It's just not a very big line, and it's one of those that suffers from the collector's portion of, having a lot of these pieces break over time and not being really survivable on the shelf or with heavy play. Unfortunately, with that toy line, like I said, a lot of the pieces broke, but it's still a really cool toy line. It was one of those that I wanted to get all the pieces, and I was just lacking one. And still to this day, I've got to fix some of the stuff that I have. Very much a collector's line. So we're down to number 3, my third line in this, and I've talked about some of these figures before, but I have to just kind of reiterate on this one. And this is actually a really good episode for Talking Toys as well, when we talked about this particular toy line. This toy line is near and dear to me just because of the fact that this was one of those birthdays when I was young where I got almost a ton of pieces in the line, and I love it. The box art is amazing. The cartoon's pretty cool. The premise of it's awesome, and I love the actual comics as well that Moore was doing at the time, though he had to be a little adult to read them. My number 3 is Kenner's Swamp Thing. So my number 3, of course, is Swamp Thing. I absolutely love this line. And being someone who really likes Swamp Thing, and I know we've talked about Swamp Thing before. We talked about him with the glow-in-the-dark Swamp Thing, or the Bio Glow. And then on Talking Toys, we've actually talked about this line before. And it really is one of my favorites, along with the Supernatural line, which almost made this, but it had some killing factors that made me not put it into this particular lineup. Now, out of the Swamp Thing, I couldn't think of just one character, so I actually chose Skin Man because of the bat bio helmet with the glowing eyes, and even the skinny, ghoulish, disposition that he has. I thought that all in all, he's a really cool figure. He's probably not the scariest out of the line, but I don't know. He's got some kind of scariness to him. Was it Dr. Demo, I think? It's got like the snake head and kind of the voodoo priest vibe. there's some really kind of unsettling figure design in this actual toy line, which makes Swamp Thing, I feel like it should go up a little bit more, but you'll see why it doesn't. It's kind of a scary line all in all, which is probably why I enjoyed it, getting so much of it in one birthday. And honestly, picking that character, like, I felt like he was, even though he's not the, like, main focus of the line, he was scary enough in his look that I thought it worked. So we're down to number 2. So my number 2 toy line. Now, this is one that it's still kind of a collector's toy line. I'd kind of gotten rid of some of the pieces over the years just because they either broke, they ended up becoming some sort of fodder. 2 of the pieces I actually framed up together. They look beautiful, and if you follow my Instagram, you go back far enough when I was doing framing, and you'll see them there. That's a son and father duo that I have together. But the toy line I'm talking about is actually 1998's Sideshow Universal Monsters. My number 2 comes in with the Universal Monsters, and I gotta tell you, this run of Universal Monsters by Sideshow was amazing. When it first came out in 98, like, I remember just going crazy for it. I loved it. Universal had been doing something really good with this particular thing in mind. They were re-releasing the monsters. They were trying to cash in on the monster vibe, which is good because sometimes we want that. The Mummy was coming back out, and the Mummy was big. And one of my favorite figures out of this line is actually the Mummy. Now, of course, I had, all Wave 1, which was the Mummy, it was Frankenstein, and then the Wolfman. And then you had a second series that came out that had the Phantom of the Opera, the Bride of Frankenstein, and the Creature from the Black Lagoon. And I remember having both waves and loving it. These days now, I've got the Phantom and I've got Wolfman, and they're actually shadow boxed together because, the Phantom was Lon Chaney Sr., and then the Wolfman was Lon Chaney Jr., so I felt like their 2 monster iconic roles needed to go together. And I haven't really seen some of the level of this in a long time, except for what NECA does. But what made this line so cool is not only did you have this nice stand that had, a peg in it, of course mine's broken off, but it had, the Mummy, it had who the actor was when the film came out, but it came with a score of accessories, like this, whole piece of writing here with hieroglyphics on it. You had the actual scrolls, the dead scrolls, and it's actual paper that's rolled up with a plastic ring on it with all this printing on it. And it's more or less, if I remember correctly, fairly movie accurate. I know that this passage is repeated on and on and on throughout there, but from the outside it looks like the real deal. And then of course you had this like box here that kept the scroll inside. It's just such a cool look. One of the things that suffers from this line is the fact that a lot of the articulation, he's kind of already posed. And the articulation is built within the sculpt of this thing. It's really sculpted out truly as a display sort of line. But, in order, like if I want to put his arm down, I'm obviously going to see the joint. If I put it up, it's hidden away. Certain things, like his wrist, this one doesn't turn very well. I feel like it's about to break off. Yep, it's about to break off, which means that's about to be glued down. Yeah, yep, told you. And even like his legs and stuff, like it's very stiff. It's a very kind of already posed. It's more statuesque more than anything else. It doesn't have a lot of play value to it. But for what it was doing at the time, for the fact that it was Universal Monsters, which we all really wanted and loved, and the only other time we got it was with Mego, and then of course with our Burger King Happy Meals, this was kind of one of those things that, hey, we're finally getting some Universal Monsters back, and it was such a pivotal point for a lot of toy collectors back in the day. It's one of those particular toys, they are so fragile, and I try not to break any of the pieces, but they're really, really difficult to kind of keep in one piece. Unfortunately, My Frankenstein bit the dust a long time ago. That was one of my favorites. It's a good toy line, but very much a collector's toy line where you don't really pose it too much. Better probably left on card. All right, so we're down to the number one toy line that I felt was like the quintessential for what I have. Probably the toy line that was the scariest of them all. I actually got this piece from a distant cousin of mine, Constantino. Thank you so much. I love this one. This sits up on my monster shelf kind of high. And growing up, I had actually several of the pieces, and I loved them. I had a human, had one of the Redwood monsters, I think one of the Magma monsters. I thought they were great. Anyways, that toy line in question was, of course, Inhumanoid by Hasbro. It is such a cool toy line. So, of course, this is my number one. Now, my number one is Inhumanoids. And I gotta tell you, I loved Inhumanoids when I was a kid. The show didn't run very long, but what they had out I thought was so cool. And it was creepy, very creepy. Now, out of the line, I only have this particular one that I got from a distant relative, Constantinos. Thank you so much. I absolutely love this figure. But in the line, we had some humans that had helmets that had, kind of glow features. As you put it in the light, they had something that glowed, much like his fangs here. See if I can get it from this side. Yeah, much like his fangs here, you had humans that had visors that lit up. And then, of course, even, bad guy trees and stuff that would have glowing eyes and extendable parts. And a lot of the figures, they weren't this big, but they had multiple scales, including the Redwood I had was probably this tall. The figure I had was probably, I think, about this tall, but it had a tiny human head because this was supposed to be scaled pretty much with like G.I. Joe size figures. So they're really, really cool, and it was such a cool line. And technically, this figure out of that line was one that I coveted so much when I was a kid. I want him so bad. And I'm glad to have him now that I could never ever part with this thing. Alright, well that's my top 5. What do you think? I gotta tell you, Tendril is probably one of my biggest bragging rights that I've got on my shelf. I love that thing so much. Let me hear your top 5. Which ones do you have what are your top 5, scary toy lines that you have in your collection? Share with me. Maybe if you have some other figures from those lines, let me know down in the comments. Tell me which one out of those lines are your favorite. And just be sure to share with me. I love chatting with you all. Again, if you haven't subscribed, be sure to subscribe. If you like this video, hit that like button down below. It lets YouTube know that you like what I'm making, alright? Alright, so remember, they're not dolls. In this case, they're action figures, or action figures from the scariest toy lines in my collection. When I'm not recording videos here on YouTube, I'm actually over on a podcast on marvindogmedia.com called Talking Toys with Taylor and Jeff. It's a really cool toy podcast. Be sure to check it out. Also, I need your help getting my YouTube channel to grow. Be sure to subscribe down below with that big red button. Hit that bell for notifications so you can be alerted of anything that comes from me to you. Like this video, it helps YouTube know that you like what I'm making, and comment down below. I like chatting with you all.